morning, everybody. It's Tom Christie back in the Decoy carving shop. And in this series, I'm going to start a new series to make a simple, functional, cork-bodied black duck in kind of a tucked head position. And we're going to do this particular decoy, which I won the IWCA Working Decoy Championship in 2007, 18 years ago. Unbelievable. But it's a good decoy. I thought I hadn't done a kind of a functional working decoy in a while, and some of the techniques with cork in particular might be of interest to you gunning decoy carvers out there, so we'll give it a shot. If you're enjoying my channel, please hit the subscribe button. It's totally free, but it does help me out. If you do that, any thumbs up and comments are always appreciated. Let's get started. All right, I've got my sheet of 4.5-inch thick cork, and I ordered this from Willie McDonald. He is still taking cork orders if you're interested in that. And I wanted to do a little layout work. The guys that do cork on a regular basis are probably going to end up laughing at my techniques here, but that's okay. I don't carve cork that often, so I'm going to use what I have. There are probably better ways to do this than what I'm going to show you. But first thing I want to do is I don't want to waste cork. And I was looking at, if I cut this slice off, I'm going to end up with a short block that is not going to do me much good for any future decoys. So I want to conserve the cork as much as possible. And it looks like I can get 3 good bodies in this direction, so I'm going to lay it out that way. I'm going to do a tail insert, so again I'm going to conserve cork, and I need to cut it about this long. My shop heater is turning on, so I apologize for the noise. Use my square and just give myself a guideline. So I need to make that cut, and then for the width, again conserving as much as possible. Width is right there. This is pretty basic stuff, but if you haven't done it before, it might be helpful to show how you get the block to begin with. Okay, so that's the block I want. And I'm going to use a hand saw to cut that out because I don't want to wrestle this thing on my bandsaw, and I don't have clearances around my bandsaw to allow that. So I'm going to hand cut that block out. The hand saw works pretty well on this cork. I'll take my time. The cuts may not be as square as on the band saw, but that's okay. Okay, now I've figured out how not to cut out your cork blocks. That's a lot of work. It's doable, but I wouldn't want to cut a whole rig out like that, so bigger bandsaw would be a good solution. Anyway, I've got my block. I'll get it squared up now on the bandsaw. This is at 2x speed, so I'm just gonna make a couple quick cuts here to square up the block. And my guidelines are still on the block, so the hand saw did wander off a bit, and it's critical to get this squared up, especially when we cut the side and top-down profiles. Just a tip, after bandsawing, I collect some of the dust that's come off the bandsaw in terms of cork dust and put that aside for later, and I'm going to use that with epoxy when we do the tail insert, so that most of that epoxy has the cork in it, and it forms kind of a cork filler for the tail and also probably the neck joint. Now I'm going to use my pattern and get it laid out on the cork. Just as a note as well, you might want to add a bottom board to your decoy, like a piece of cedar, something that's going to resist the water if it happens to break seal or the finish begins to come off in use. I'm going to make this decoy, keep it simple. I want it to be solid cork, so I'm not going to try to hollow it out, with no bottom board, and hopefully the flotation will be right where I want it. We'll check that out later. So I'm going to make full use of this block that I cut out, and I'm going right up to the top of the cork here so that I can use all of the cork possible. This will be the tail insert area, and I'm going to use hardwood because the tail takes abuse. Now we need to transfer that up to the top. And to do that, I use a square just to be sure. In case your block has been cut a little on an angle or something. It looks like this is pretty square, but you can see there's a little bit of difference there. Same thing here. That's good and straight. So now I can lay my top pattern on here. And just a reminder, the body only has to extend back to this point. The tail will be hardwood insert, so I don't have to cut the tail out on the body profile. I'll get that positioned. I'm using a permanent marker here for my, it works well for cork, and I'll sand all of this off. We're actually going to char this decoy with a torch and use the cork as kind of a natural finish on a black duck. This is not something I invented. A lot of decoy carvers have been using this technique for a long time, and I think it makes a fantastic looking functional cork decoy. So I'm going to get a center line on here, and right now I want to, before I lose my pattern position, I want to get a center line back here that I can actually see. And I have a center line up here. And the reason I want to do that is I need to bring this back to this point and keep it symmetrical. All right, now we're ready to cut out. This is a Magnum decoy, so really wide. So I've got my bandsaw almost at its far reaches there. Had to adjust the guard a little bit to get that opening. One thing I wanted to mention, cork is very dusty, and so I always wear a respirator when I'm bandsawing or grinding cork, just like Tupelo or any other carving material. The cork material is relatively soft, so it's pretty easy to cut through, but on a very thick cut like this, you want to take your time anyway and not push the blade too hard. So I'm just going to cut out that side profile, going right to the top of the block. And I did shave through there a little because I'm just trying to make the most out of this block that I have, but that's okay. repositioning my hands to keep them away from the blade. So I'm going to save those 2 scrap pieces for later. Cut out that side breast profile. And now we'll cut out this tail insert area. When you're backing out, go slowly. It's easy to pull the blade off the guide wheels. If you go too fast, then it happens to snag. Now, to get down to the bottom, now I'm going to just use a series of cuts to go across and go across where that other cut is. Got that piece out of the way. Just another safety tip. You know, I almost tried to flick that piece of scrap off with my finger. That's never a good idea. So I used the body block to just tap that out of the way so I don't get my fingers close to the blade. All right, we finished the side profile. Now we can do the top down. All right, now I'm going to tack the scrap pieces back on the top. And you can see I actually went through here because I'm trying to utilize all the block that I can, but that's not a problem. We can put the pieces back on either side, and then I'm going to use a nail to tack the pieces on. Make sure everything's lined up correctly. And I'm going to put 2 in here to keep it from side shifting on me during the cutting. I'm going to do the same thing back here on the tail end. Again, I've got to make sure I've got it lined up where it needs to be. And it looks like I've got that set. And I just go on the center line. And with cork, it's easy to pull these nails back out, so I can just drive them home so they're nice and firm. And they'll be easy to get out. I just want those pieces in good shape. You can see there's a little shift because of the flexibility of the material. So I'll just go at it slow and be careful. We'll cut out this top-down profile. I'm going to start at the front. I've got the blade adjusted for height, and I want to make sure I don't trim off any of that front breast profile from the side. So rather than strictly follow the pattern, I'm looking for making sure that blade doesn't shave off the front of the breast and go from there. I'm going to run this at 2 times speed since these are relatively simple cuts, just so you're aware. Okay, we're at 2 times speed, and again, I'm just taking it slowly. This is where the side pocket meets the rump, so a little bit of change of angle, and then one more change where the tail begins. You can see for a thick block, this cork cuts pretty easily. That should do it. Okay, we've got the side and the top profile cut out. While I have my scrap pieces on here, I'm going to mark the center line here in the middle of the decoy. And now we can carefully pull out these pieces. We'll have a little repair to do, but that's part of what the cork dust is for as well. Okay, get rid of the scrap pieces. I'll save my nails for future projects. All right, now I want to get a center line back on the Decoy, and then I'm going to use the bandsaw on a 30-degree angle to trim off some of the cork, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that in a second here. Let me get a center line back on. We'll do a little bit of sketching and then back to the bandsaw. All right, when I get back to the bandsaw, I'm switching to a pencil now. I don't want to have to deal with the ink later on in the cork. I want to take just a little corner off here. I want to leave as much width as possible for good flotation, but this cork is soft and kind of susceptible to a blow on a sharp corner like that. So for functional durability, I'm just going to take a little bit of a corner off that bottom. And then the side pocket is going to be kind of in this area. So I want to take off some of this material above. And the way I'm going to do that is just kind of give myself a rough guideline on top. By the way, I'm not going to have any raised primaries on this bird. We're going to keep it clean and durable on the back, so no raised primaries. So I don't have to worry about leaving material for cross primaries back here as I'm trimming off some of this cork. And I'm going to take that down to about here on the side. We'll just go take a few cuts on the bandsaw. All right, I've got my table set at a 30-degree angle for these trim cuts. And just a word on bandsaw safety. Many of you are very experienced. There may be beginners out there. You've got to be careful with a bandsaw. You've got to keep your fingers totally away from the blade. So as I'm cutting, you're going to see me reposition my hands continually to keep them away from the bandsaw blade. Just never hurts to issue caution, especially if you're experienced. You can take it for granted that you know how to do it, myself included, but I always remind myself, Tom, keep your hands away from the blade. All right, enough said. I'm going to trim off this lower piece first. And I'm going up maybe a 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch here, like we talked about, just to get a bevel on that lower edge so it's not susceptible to damage in the field. Same thing this side. Now I want to do this side cut, and I've got my bird flat on the table at that 30-degree angle, and I'm kind of following my pencil guidelines above for this first cut. And I don't have cross primaries or anything, so I can take this right back to the tail coverts. Now this cut I want to take a little bit more off, and I've got the bottom of the decoy resting on the table, but you're kind of freehanding this. So thankfully with the cork, I mentioned that before, it cuts pretty easily, so the blade isn't working too hard. Now I'm going to slice a little bit off here on an angle. Keep your hands out of the way of the blade in case it snags and wants to pull the block down. That's it. All right, you can see there's a lot of rounding yet to do, but taking a couple slices off saves a lot of grinding dust if you do it carefully, like we talked about. Next, I want to cut out the tail insert and the head. All right, I've got a piece of oak. This is 1-inch oak, and I trace my side pattern on here. Cut it to width and squared up the block, and traced my top-down pattern. And I left a little piece of wood here as a handle because I like to cut out the side profile first, these cuts, and then leave this intact so that all the pieces hang together while I cut the top profile out. And then we can trim off the edge and release this from the block. This oak material is really hard, and this is about 4 inches in width, so we need to go really slow on these cuts. So I'm doing that lower tail profile from the side first. And this is actual speed, by the way. I don't want to speed this up. I'm going to take that to where I don't cut through and then slowly back out so I don't pull the blade off. Now I'll do these cuts. You can see that little handle gives me something to hang on to safely. Now I'm going to change the angle here rather than trying to bend the blade around that sharp corner, which is not going to work, especially in oak. Cutting the top profile, I'm going to reposition my hand to get on the back side of the blade there. And again, I don't want to cut clear through here because I want the pieces to hang together. Now I've repositioned the blade for depth, and I'm going to cut the top down profile of the tail. You can see the top and bottom scrap pieces are still attached. So it's a nice way to get the job done without tacking pieces of wood back together. Now I just want to make this final cut. Carefully. That should be enough that I can get the pieces of wood to release here. And this one will snap off, and I'll have a little ridge that I need to deal with, but that's very easy to take off with a knife or the grinder. All right, we've got the tail cut out. That fits in there nice. And that'll give us a nice, durable hardwood tail for any abuse that the tail takes. Now let's get the head cut out. All right, I've got a nice squared up block, 2 3/4 inches wide. Just trace my pattern. I'm using Tupelo. On this decoy, you may want to use cedar or some other water resilient wood. But for... All right, Jack Cox, I guess you're right. I need a pencil sharpener. Jack's gonna love that. I'm gonna leave it in. He's a good friend and he always kids me about the rustic pencils that I use. All right, let's get that cut out. I've got this at 2 times speed since it's a pretty safe cut. I always try to leave my pencil line intact so that when I sand, I'm sanding back to the actual pattern. I've left a little extra thickness on the tip of the bill on this bird because it is a gunning decoy, so we want some good strength out there at the tip of the bill. All right, head's ready to go. Well, it's early yet, but it's starting to look like a duck. So that has a nice fit with the body. I'm going to make this bird just straight ahead, not try to cock his head one way or the other. Now I'm going to use my pattern and just mark the center of the eye on both sides. And then we'll come over here to the drill press. I've got about a 1/8 inch drill and I'm just going to drill a guide hole. That'll give us a guideline later after the carving is done to help locate where the eye should be. The other thing it does is just kind of gives me a guideline as I'm carving where the eyes are going to be too. So I think that's helpful. I don't try to drill full diameter because if you've watched some of my other videos, often I need to make some adjustments of the eye position after the carving is done to make sure that eye is nailed right where it needs to be. It's a huge part to me of correctly projecting the species. If you get the eye way too far back in the head or way too close to the bill, it really makes a huge difference. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch hardwood dowel to dowel the head to the cork body, and I want to drill the holes now while things are kind of in the flat and not all rounded off. So I want the dowel to be, well, first things first. One approach would be get a long drill bit, go right down through the head, down into the body. I don't want to drill through the head, so I want to locate my dowel in the body, and I can drill that in a vertical in my drill press. I've got my center established, and I'm just going to drill down a couple of inches into the cork. You could go all the way through if you want. I'm just going to drill about 2 inches. That'll give me a good firm foundation into the cork. Now that I have the body peg positioned, I'm just going to give myself a guideline here on the orientation of this, because I'm going to have to hold the head while I do the drill press work. But I know that's where it needs to be. All right, I've got my stop set at the proper depth so I don't go too deep. And then since the block is square, I don't have to worry about this orientation, but I will have to eyeball this as I'm drilling down. Get my center first. Should be about right. Now that should line up pretty well if I've been living right. All right, that looks good. All right, everybody, I think that's a good place to end session 1. I don't want these videos to get too long, and we've kind of got all the basic components bandsawed out. In the next session, we'll start shaping up the head. Until then, Tom Christie signing out.